And I'm live. Yes. Excellent. Yeah, Southern, I don't know, they announced that yesterday. My son goes to LBI schools, and they're not following the same strategy that Stafford and Southern are doing. So please correct me if I'm wrong. Southern and Stafford are shutting down, going virtual this Wednesday for the rest of the December, but then they go back just. So they already did it. Cool. But they're going back January 4th. That's what I heard. I just wanted to confirm that. So, okay, so they're going back January 4th. My son's school, they're going to school all this week. Next week, they're going virtual for the 3 days, my son's school and LBI. And then they will be going virtual again for the week after Christmas break. Now, doesn't that make more sense? I don't know. Well, don't say that. I feel like Barnegat has a long-standing inferiority complex from Southern. Believe me, I grew up in Barnegat. I know what it's like. So we didn't even have a high school. Fun fact, you know the Edwards School, right? Cool. You know how it used to be Barnegat High School, right? Did you know that it wasn't just Barnegat kids? Stafford kids, LBI kids, Little Egg kids, Waretown kids all came to Barnegat High School during like the 40s and 50s. You know? Kids from LBI, instead of taking the bridge over, they would actually take their boats over the bay to get to school on time. The train station, which is now obviously the rail trail, but the train station used to drop by the hour from different towns around Ocean County. The more you know. Anyway, to this. So there's a couple things that are going to be coming up. First and foremost, progress reports are due by the end of this week. I'm gonna make sure everything's in. So no worries on that. I wanted to fit in an additional, a couple different additional assessments in regards to this linear unit, and we're going to spend more time on this linear unit today. And I do have a plan for that. I'm going to tell you what that plan is in a few minutes. Before I leave here today, before I leave the school today, I am just going to be throwing a very basic quizzes at you in regards to linear. Should be very not painless. That's probably a terrible way of phrasing it. Let's just say it will be painless in the sense where it won't wreck you. But obviously it's the quizzes that I'm going to be counting. So I will be throwing that at you today before I leave here. I just got to cross a couple T's, dot a couple I's, and then send that out to you. That'll be taken care of. I still plan on getting in another major in regards to linear, because we did like a little major that, again, I'm still having trouble finishing those because of all of the extra things that they have us doing after school. Which is like mapping out the entire rest of the year by standard and by the week that you're going to teach it and the lessons that you're going to do it with. And we have been preparing for midterms. Sounds fun. I know. I'm excited. Anyway, so I am planning on getting another major in, but I'm going to talk more about that on Thursday. I'll talk way more about that on Thursday. So I'm going to put that on the back burner for a moment. I'm going to tell you there is going to be a quizzes minor being thrown at you today. I'm just going to do that before I leave the building today. Yeah, we'll keep going. So my goal for today is this. I entitled this lesson Linear FRQ. Frequently, free response questions. What is wrong with me today? Anyway, probably a lot. I have told you that half of your test is made up of multiple choice. And we talked about that last time. Half of your AP test is made up of multiple choice questions. You have 90 minutes to get done 40 questions, multiple choice. The other half of your test, AP test in May, the other half is free response questions. Now, again, I don't know what it's like for other subjects, but for AP, you get an hour and a half. Do you know how many free response questions? In which 5 of them are considered to be your run-of-the-mill free response questions that could cover any topic that you have covered over the course of AP STAT. And then there is a 6th one which is an extended constructed response question. That one's a bit more involved and a bit lengthier. The sixth one, they recommend that you take roughly a half an hour on, roughly a half an hour. And the remaining 5, they suggest that you take approximately no more than 12 minutes per problem. They've timed this thing down so crazily. It seems almost impossible thinking about it, like I have to do all of these questions in this amount of time, but once you actually get into the flow of things, it gets a little bit easier. So I want to do a little practice today. I have a free response question lined up that I am going to be sharing with you through the Google stream, and just me saying that, I'm going to suggest, hey, if you have your Chromebooks, get them open, get on the Google Classroom thing. I haven't assigned it yet. I haven't clicked submit yet, but I will in a little bit. I just want to explain to you what's going to happen while you're logging on. But I'm going to throw is just practice. Today's practice. And I am going to give you approximately 12 minutes to get this practice free response done. And again, I say 12 minutes because that's the recommended amount of time. Obviously, when you're on the actual test, the minutes will vary. Oh, I spent 10 minutes on this. I spent 14 minutes on this. Yeah, that's fine. That averages out. But I'm going to give you 12 today just to see what it feels like. 12 minutes. Then I am going to give you the scoring guidelines. I'm going to give you the scoring guidelines, and I am going to give you 2 different student written answers from previous year's tests. Not my students. These are through College Board. And you're going to have the opportunity to grade not only yourself, but you will have the opportunity to grade these other 2 students as well. And then I have what is known as a AP commentary, in which an AP grader actually did grade theirs and will tell you what score they should have gotten. And you can kind of compare that against what you did as well. Hello. All right, so let me get this thing clicked on, whatever it's called. I'm putting something into the Google Classroom stream that you guys are going to be working on. So here's what I'm going to say. Make sure on the Google Classroom stream, don't open it just yet. I'm going to say open it once I start the timer, because I'm only going to give you those 12 minutes. So let me get this thing in here first. Let's see. There, and there. Let's make sure this is the one I need. Yes, I believe this should work. Here is the question. And then I'm going to throw on a timer over here. I'll put on the 12 right there. Chapow. Because like I said, I am only going to give you 12 minutes. Now, obviously, I'm going to click it and give it a few moments to kind of load, because obviously it takes a few minutes for this thing to go out throughout the realms of the internet. So what do you need? Obviously, this is just practice. You can choose to write this down on a separate sheet of paper. You can choose to type out your response into a Google Doc. Obviously, if you need your calculator, you have the calculator in your Chromebook. But again, this is just practice. I'm not going to be collecting this. This is going to be for you to get the practice on, number 1. And then number 2, to be able to grade yourself based on the scoring guidelines. So I won't start the timer just yet, but I'm just going to click submit. Make sure that thing actually goes through first. Post. Boom. Yes, that is the PDF right there. So please let me know if that's gone through the Google Stream. Good, it's there? All right, I'm gonna start the timer and begin. All right. Stop with your writing, because you can't write no more. When that time's up, that time's up. Now, of course, that was just one question. When you're taking the actual AP test, of course, you're given all 6 free response, in which you will obviously have to answer within that hour and a half. So if you take more time or less time in one or the other, we'll see what goes on there. Every free response question on the AP test is graded on a scale of 1 to 4. Every AP question or AP free response question is graded on a scale of 1 to 4. And the way that they determine that is based on a system of what they call when an AP grader looks over your response, they have a preset set of instructions called scoring guidelines that they are going to go through, and they're going to look at each section that they desire to look at within your response. and grade it either as an E, a P, or an I. Your goal is to get E's. P is kind of in the middle, and I is deemed incomplete or inaccurate or incorrect or something along those lines. AP graders are not that nice when it comes to that sort of thing. The next thing that I'm going to be posting into your Google Classroom stream, here we go. I am going to be giving you two things. Let's make sure they load properly. Here we go. These are the scoring guidelines. I can spell scoring guidelines today. And student responses. Now, I'm not just going to set you off on this without much instruction. Boom, posted. But I am going to just talk very briefly about the scoring guidelines as they appear so that you can know exactly how to handle them. They appeared in the stream. I'm looking at the one that says scoring guidelines first. Now, typically when they give you scoring guidelines, they break it up into two parts. They break it up into the part of the solution and then how you would score it. Now, the solution in this case, I want to be very clear. This is what they deem to be the ideal solution. This is the ideal solution. This is the solution as if you were somebody who wrote the test. This is not what they are expecting. You don't have to have exactly word for word what they have written, no. But this is something that they would prefer to see. Now, just for the sake of argument, let me kind of go back here. Ba-boom, ba-boom, to the actual questions itself. Because I want to compare the questions to what the responses or what the ideal solution would be. So the first question was, what is the equation of the least squares regression line that describes the relationship between operating cost per hour and number of passenger seats in the plane? Define any variables used in the equation. Now, in our notes, least squares regression line, what the heck are they talking about? Least squares regression line. Yeah, it's the line of best fit. It's just whatever the line of best fit is. I think I even wrote it as LSRL or some junk like that into our notes because I told you that they would be using terminology like that. So when they're talking about the line of best fit, that's exactly what they want. Now, just for the sake of argument, you got a whole computer output right here. Ugh. What numbers do I need from that computer output? What numbers do I need from that computer output, though, in order to make that line of best fit? Oh, no one wants to say it because they don't want to be wrong. Oh, hold on. Time out. Let's go to the scoring guidelines real quick. Let's just take a look and see what the scoring guideline says. Or say, I should say. Here. Let me just open these up. I'm just going to open these up over here. Hold on. Let's see, teaching, subjects, that, this. Here we go. So I wanted to open the question and the scoring guidelines. There we go. Open up those two first. Good. Scoring guidelines. Predicted cost equals 1136 plus 14.673 times number of passenger seats, or y hat equals 1136 plus 14.673 x, and then they define x and y according to what the question says. As I've talked about in the past, whenever you have this output, these numbers are really the ones you want to be focusing on. You're not going to be dealing with the T and the P for now. You're not going to be dealing with the standard deviation. You're going to be dealing with the coefficients. The coefficients for the constant, meaning your y-intercept, and the coefficients for the number of seats, meaning your slope. So now, again, according to the scoring guidelines, I'm going to flip back there real quick. This is the ideal solution. But if you scroll down a little bit to scoring, I want to read this The student response should include the following elements. Number one, the correct equation of the least squares regression line with variables correctly defined. The correct value of the correlation coefficient, which we'll talk about in a minute. A correct interpretation of the given correlation coefficient. And a complete explanation of why the given least squares line would not be appropriate for describing the relationship over the restricted range. Each element, is scored as essentially correct, partially correct, or incorrect. EPI. That is how they grade them. Part A. You would get an E if you had the correct equation and your variables were defined correctly. So this is what you're going to do for yourself. Whatever you ended up having, you would either give yourself an EP or an I. You would give yourself an E if you did have the correct equation with correctly defined variables. I'm gonna say something very specific in a moment. You would give yourself a P if only the equation is correct. Now, mind you, notice they didn't say anything about defining the variables. You had to have the equation correct in order just to get a P. And then you would have an I if the equation is not correct and you didn't define anything. That would be basically put. If you go back to the ideal solution, notice the two ways in which they do this. Now, mind you, there are more ways to do this. And I'll show you the additional way to do it in a moment. But if you notice in the first ideal solution, they defined it as predicted cost. Predicted cost. That is technically acceptable if you're not going to put a hat on it. That's technically acceptable. If you were going to put a hat on it, that'd be fine. You could also write it as cost. The order of this doesn't really matter as long as you put the variable on the 14.673. Let's just call it number of seats or something along those lines, plus 1136. If you wrote it like that, that would also be acceptable. Now, if you notice, for the first equation that they gave, they didn't actually, quote unquote, define the variables, but technically they did. By writing the variables in words, they have technically defined it. If you use the letters X and Y, and your Y better have a hat on it, but if you use the letters X and Y, then you needed to also say X equals this, Y equals this. You needed to define them. You can give yourself the appropriate letter. Let's look at part B. Part B wanted to know what is the value of the correlation coefficient, otherwise known as what letter? R, just R, which they don't give you in that output, which we'll talk about. What is the value of the correlation coefficient for operating cost per hour and number of passenger seats in the plane? Interpret the correlation. Interpret the correlation. Now, as I said, when you're getting the adjusted is not for you right now. The adjusted is for something way into the future, for something like an upperclassman in college majoring in statistics. You're going to be focusing on the regular R squared, the 57%. Obviously, when you get back to R, you square root it. You square root 0.57. You got to square root 0.57. Now tell me, if you square root 0.57, is it the positive one or the negative one? Positive. Why? I'm sorry, the what was positive? Well, yes, but more specifically, what aspect of the equation was positive? The slope. The slope was positive. Now, mind you, they could have written it like this. Now, this is incorrect, obviously, but if I put a minus sign in my equation right here, the slope is still positive. Yeah, so it was still positive there. But yes, it definitely should be positive. Let's look at the ideal solution. The ideal solution, the value of the correlation coefficient would be R equals, they said the positive of the square root of 0.57. R is positive because the scatter plus shows a positive association. And here is the interpretation. Well, they have an R of 0.75. There is a moderate or strong or moderately strong positive linear relationship between operating cost per hour and number of passenger seats. Or, and they give you an out. They do give you an out here. They give you alternate ways of stating this so that you have more chances of gaining points. You could say, and this is the R squared definition, 57% of the variability in operating cost per hour can be explained by a linear relationship between cost and number of passenger seats, and the relationship is positive. Say something along those lines. I would probably stick to the top one if it were me. Well, if R is positive 0.75, then I can say, well, there's a moderately strong linear association. It's positive, it's going up, things of that nature. But then I would give the context being between the variables that I'd previously defined. So let's go to the scoring. The way that the scoring is going to go for Part B. Part B addresses the second and third elements. Element 2 is this. If you correctly state the R value as positive 0.755, yay, you get an E. Good for you. If you only stated that it was positive or negative, then that's a P. And if the student states any other value of R, you get an I, and that's if you use the adjusted. If you use the adjusted R squared, you automatically get an I. Automatic. But then there is an additional element to that part. There is a separate E classification depending on the correct interpretation. Interpretation. Now, mind you, if you left it blank, if you didn't interpret, it's automatically an I. You get an E if you addresses based on the correct understanding of the correlation coefficient, 3 or 4 of the following. The type of relationship, meaning linear. The strength, moderately strong. It wasn't very strong. The direction, positive. And the context. Now, the funny thing is, if you left out context, that technically still qualifies for an E, which is kind of nice. And then again, they give you an out, or if you talk about R squared in the definition there. Yes? Not necessarily. I think the understanding would be like, it's just, I mean, they give you R squared, R squared equals, so then R equals. But verbally state that it would have to be the positive R because of the positive slope may not be entirely necessary for the following reason. So if you just put R equals 0.755 with no work, now mind you, states, not shows the calculation, you did technically say or talk about why it's a positive down here when you talked about the direction. So it's kind of like they go hand in hand with each other. It's weird. Scrolling down. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Look at this. They give you like little notes down here, which I love. These notes are for the AP graders. If a student gives a correct interpretation of R, but then incorrectly explains R squared, which mind you, you didn't have to. You did not have to explain R squared. But let's just say you were trying to be thorough and you continued to explain R squared and did it wrong. This is considered a parallel solution and is incorrect. Meaning, if you did the R part correct, R is equal to this. Here's the correct definition of R. But then you decided to be like, I got 10 minutes extra. I'm going to keep going. R squared is this. And you did it wrong. They wouldn't give you credit for the previous part. They would just knock you down to an I. Only do what the question's asking for the most part. Only do what the question's asking. Finally, part C. Suppose that you want to describe the relationship between operating cost per hour and the number of passenger seats in the plane for planes only in the range 250 to 350. Hold on. Where's 250 to 350 on this ridiculous thing? 250 to 350. So it'd be that range right there. Oh, holy crap, that changes everything. That changes everything. All right, hold on here. That changes a lot of crap. What is going on? Scrolling down. What's the question asking? Does the line shown in the scatter plot still provide the best description of the relationship for data in this range? Well, definitely not, clearly. But they want to know why or why not. Well, ideal solution for C. No. The equation of the least squares regression line is influenced. They used the proper definition of influential points per se. But they said that the least squares regression line is influenced by the 3 points in the upper right-hand corner. And now, mind you, that may not be necessary to talk about them being influential points. We'll see how this is scored in a few moments. An ideal solution. The 7 remaining points would have a negative correlation. Hence, the slope of the recalculated least squares regression line is negative. All right. Let's see how they scored it. I skipped it. There it is. Element 4 is essentially correct if they state that the existing line is not a good fit for the remaining 7 points and correctly explain that the restricted data has a negative correlation or the recalculated least squares regression line has a negative slope. Interesting. In the description of how they grade it, they didn't say that you had to classify the other points as influential or anything along those lines. You just had to state that it was not a good fit. The restricted data would have now a negative correlation, or the recalculated least squares regression line would now have a negative slope. It would be partial. It would get you a P if you explained why the existing line is not a good fit for the remaining 7 points, but do not communicate that the restricted data has a negative correlation or it has a negative slope, or you remove fewer than the specified 5 points and give a correct interpretation of the effect of the correlation or slope of the line of least squares regression line. You remove fewer than the specified 5 points. Interesting. So now, mind you, they didn't give you anything for I because basically if you didn't do these things, then they would knock you down to an I automatically. It's like, well, there's too many things that you could have done to get an I. Oh, there's a teacher at the door. I don't know what's going on. Okay, cool. So now, hopefully, during the course of this, you've been looking at this. You've been looking at your own responses. I'm going to give you a minute or so, obviously, to do your own grading on this particular thing. But I am also going to give you more than a few minutes, probably like another 5 or so minutes or so, where I would like you to open up those student responses. And I would like you to grade those people. On the live stream of Google, there was also something called student responses, in which these are actual students who took the AP test in 2002. This would never be me. So the question then becomes, what do these 2 students earn? I'm going to give you a little bit of time, like I said right now, maybe like 5 or so minutes, to look through these student responses, and I want you to grade them. Read carefully, and let's see what kind of score you can get. Now, I missed the best part. I missed the best part of this whole thing. At the bottom of the scoring guidelines, what score do you give yourself? You give yourself either a 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on which elements you got correct. Now, what's nice about this, it's like, okay, well, obviously, if I got E, it's correct. For elements 1 through 4, essentially correct responses count as 1 element. Partially correct responses count as a half element. So basically, if you got an E, that's a 4. If you got an EEPP, that'd be 1, 2, 2.5, 3, right there. If you got an EPPP, that would technically be 2.5. But if a paper scores, for example, 2.5, use a holistic approach to determine whether the score goes up or down depending on the issue. It's a very subjective statement right there, but that's what you're going to do. So take the next, like I said, a little bit of time for 6 minutes. Give yourself a score. Give those 2 students a score. Go. if you can imagine, you take the AP test in May, and then the AP graders for 2 weeks go down to St. Louis, and they get put up in like a hotel, and they get 2 weeks to grade all the free responses. 200,000 plus free responses from across the country. They get to grade them and be dorks and argue over the minutia of how somebody worded something or how somebody interpreted something or how they could argue something. I don't know. It's just super fun. I so want to be one of them. I so want to be one of them. Obviously, we're living in the age of COVID right now, so going down to St. Louis may not be the best thing this year. But I do plan on, in the next couple of years, actually applying to be an AP grader. I think that would be the fun world. I just get 2 weeks, but I get to get put up in a hotel and read math questions. Anyway, shut up. So, first student response. Anybody give the person a 4? Couple of hands. Okay. Anybody not give the person a 4? Why? Let me bring it up here. Go ahead. Keep talking, though. Oh, yeah. Keep talking. The one right here, no, because within this range on the scatter plot, there is a negative relationship between, what's that say? Operating. Okay. So what do you think? To kind of argue against them? Oh, you're looking at part B. Dude, I'm so sorry. Now we're on the same page. Good. So they actually did both, but did they do it correctly? You're saying no. But they said 50% of the variability in operating cost per hour can be attributed linear relationship to the number of passenger seats. Oh. They didn't do context or... Well, didn't they do context between the passenger seats and operating cost per hour?
It's not technically separated by like an R. So like at 4, right? He doesn't have 4 to like separate it.
Yeah.
And you kind of see on the continuation, right? He writes a linear relationship.
Right here. Yeah.
So I think he does have a 4.
Would it surprise you to know he did get a 4? I know, right? Now, keep in mind, even if you got like a 3.5, even if they gave him a 3.5, depending on the strength of writing, it could be bumped up. Could be. I have commentary for it in a minute. What about the second person? Anybody give him a 4? Not as many hands shooting up. Anybody give him a 3? More hands shooting up. Anyone give him a 2? Oh. Sorry, you guys are very strict. I'm going to post this. Now, we don't have time right now to kind of go over the details of this, but I am going to post this right here. Something called commentary, which is actually the AP commentary on these questions and their rationale for giving them the first person a 4 and the second person a 3. So just to keep that in mind, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I wanted to make sure that you saw that there actually is commentary on these questions, which is nice. Pay attention to Google Classroom. I am going to be posting a quizzes before I leave the building here today. And we will talk more about that major on Thursday. Just as a side note, even if we're snowed out on Thursday, we were told by our principal we're still required to get work done. Yeah. And I am so hyped for that. Anyway, we'll see you then.